I'm not American, and I have to deal with American culture on a daily basis. This is how effervescent American culture is. And so, as a foreigner, I look into what we are shown from American culture with some perplexity, because I hear whiteness a lot. White supremacy, white this, white the other. And we hear black a lot. Anti-blackness, in fact, being used. But no one ever takes the time to define blackness. And I find that interesting, because I think it's actually something that it's got this kind of central perspective in American culture, and no one feels that they can talk about it. So I'm going to try and have a sensitive conversation about this. We're going to be trying very, very delicate about this, Connor.
I defer to Lizzo's judgment, and she says twerking is in black people's blood and bones. So
this is why we're going to try and be more sensitive, right?
Yes.
Because I think that actually this is what the Democrats are enforcing on black people in America, whereas I think shall we call them Republican or conservative blacks, are actually trying to take a proper place among just normal people, and the Democrats are in fact in some way keeping the knee on the neck of the black community by imposing their view of blackness on them. And the reason we, of course, have to talk about this is because America is the most powerful country and the content is everywhere, which is what Bo and Josh discussed in the latest episode of Contemplations, just how America became the most powerful country. How have we been led to this unbelievable position where we have to talk about black American culture non-stop? It's on TV all the time. Well, it is, and we have to. So I thought we would. And so, anyway, America seems to be trapped in this racial sludge. And so, as a foreigner, I'm looking into these murky depths. And I think I can see places that Americans aren't really comfortable with. And so I'm going to make my position on all of this very clear. I don't believe in racial politics. I don't think that a person's skin colour is actually very germane to anything, really. You know, there are many more differences within a race than there are between races, and you get people of all kinds of inclinations in any walk of life.
Yeah, so you can't involuntarily conscript people into your revolutionary cause just based on their melanin content.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, there is a massive chasm between Thomas Sowell and a gangbanger, and if you don't have eyes, I guess you can make that assumption. But
on the flip side, also saying white, I don't really identify as a white person.
No, I don't feel any kinship with the Albanian people traffickers or the Germans.
Yeah, or anyone.
No.
You know, that's and in Europe, calling yourself white is kind of irrelevant. It's like, okay, but what if that guy's Irish? And what if that guy's Spanish? Yeah, exactly. Right. It's about ethnic identity in Europe. And so race, skin color means nothing. But of course, in America, you can understand why it has been compressed into a conflation of race and values. And so these things become interchangeable in a way. So someone who is in favor of a European standard of architecture is now said to be enforcing white supremacy. Yeah. But there's actually nothing racial about it. And in fact, this kind of architecture, for example, can be found all over the world. Yeah. Because anyone can appreciate the beauty of classical architecture.
Yeah, the concept of a melting pot has now been corrupted by race activists and turned into a crucible instead. And they dichotomize it as, America is the fire and furnace in which the impure part of the metal is burned off. But actually, we feel like we're being treated as that impure part of the metal, and you've just set the standard as the arbitrary metal you want to keep. So it is always about conceptualizing it as a distinction, just because it's a visual distinction because of the cultural inheritance rather than a long-standing geographical and ethnic lineage distinction.
Yeah, and so just to be clear, the Americans therefore conflate race with values, which I don't, because of course I look at, say, the values of the French, and they're just as white as we are, but they're also disgusting.
Yeah, and I get on far better with the Nigerian granddads who drive my Ubers that say, Sadiq Khan, moron.
Than a German leftist, for example, which are disgusting in every case. Anyway, so the Americans have been struggling with this for quite some time. This is just an article in the New York Times from 2015. What is whiteness? It's like, who cares?
Matt Walsh's next documentary.
Exactly. There's no, I would say there's no such thing, and that's because I'm not an American. But they say this, right? So in the mid to late 19th century, the existence of several white races was widely assumed, notably the superior Saxons and the inferior Celts. Each race, they were called races, had its characteristic racial temperament. So we would call this cultural.
So Thomas Sowell in Race and Economics documents how the N-word was used for Irish people. And then we all remember the hierarchy of exclusion. Watch it. The hierarchy of exclusion of the signs which reprehensibly said, no black people, no dogs, no Irish.
Yeah.
And my grandmother, who was an Irish immigrant, was subject to those. So
British propaganda against the Irish was pretty harsh, actually.
Yeah, and so the distinction is not purely skin colour. It, again, is culturally discriminatory.
In the 19th century, the Saxon race was said to be intelligent, energetic, sober, Protestant, and beautiful. Celts, in contrast, were said to be stupid, impulsive, drunken, Catholic, and ugly.
I resemble that remark.
By the early 20th century, the descendants of the early Irish immigrants had successfully elevated Celts into the superior realm of Northern Europeans. Well done, Celts. You get to be Northern Europeans.
Fantastic.
by the 19th...
We made it, Mum.
This is the thing, like, as a European, this is just ridiculous.
Yeah, well, my membership card arrived in the post. It was a proud day.
By the 1940s, anthropologists had announced they had a new classification: white, Asian, and black were the only real races. And so these are the Negroid race, the Mongoloid race, and the Caucasoid race. This is actually based on anthropology, actually, as in things like the shape of the orbital sockets of your eyes. They actually broadly correlate. So the Europeans have got a kind of ovoid one. I can't remember which way round it was, but the Negroid has a square, and then the Asian has a spherical, like ocular socket and stuff like this. It's like, okay.
Yeah, that observation has no moral content.
Exactly. It's okay, fine, but that, and so race has been compressed purely into a biological term, and so obviously there's very little difference between, like any European races, if you can say that. And so white just became all of Europe, and then take that over to America, and now you've got the cultural attachment of white, and that becomes all of Europe. And then you bring that back to Europe, and it seems ludicrous to say that the Italians have got the work ethic of the Germans.
Yeah, the implacable homogeneity.
Yeah, exactly. It's just preposterous, and anyone who's spent any time living in Europe will know this. And so they end this by just saying, look, the monolithic definition of whiteness is antithetical to social justice. Perhaps we should encourage a rebellion against it. Just as blacks and whites joined together as abolitionists to bring down American slavery in the 19th century, anti-racist whites in the 1990s called themselves race traitors, believing that social justice for all demands treason against white supremacy. What are you talking about?
But how naive of you to think that the tool with which to beat white people over the head would actually be dispensed with, and that race colourblindness is the goal rather than the perpetuation of racial division. How silly.
Anyway, so I carried on. I mean, for example, this perspective has carried on, and we saw it in 2020 when the Smithsonian decided that they would try and be helpful. If you can scroll down on this, just so we can get the graph up, the
table, the graphic.
There we go. The white. Yeah. So you've got this, and this I think proves my point rather nicely. And everyone got really offended by this, right? Because this felt prescriptive. Because it uses the term white. It's assuming that an entire race holds to these values. You've got things, if you can scroll down through it, you've got rugged individualism,
with the photo
family
of
structure,
John Henry Irons there, funnily enough.
Emphasis on the scientific method, the history, which I think is particularly interesting, the Protestant work ethic, the religion, status, power and authority, time, but then aesthetics, but also justice, and of course, various other things. And one thing, communication in particular, the King's English. White.
Yeah.
The King's English. You can scroll back up, it's English common law.
Yeah.
Obsession with the British Empire. White. No. Okay, what you're saying is that the only white people on earth are English people. That's what you're saying with this Smithsonian, right? Now, that's fine. I don't care.
It's an intensely American perspective because of the roots of your legal and political tradition are in England. Yeah.
What you were talking about here, what you call white culture is English culture, British culture, which is why it's based on English common law. It's why you speak the King's English, and it's why you're obsessed with the British Empire.
But it's funny because I suppose in certain areas of Britain, the culture is far closer to contemporary Black American culture than it is this.
Yeah, absolutely. This is why the Protestant work ethic, the focus on politeness, broadly speaking, but it's not universal even in England.
It doesn't always apply to Liverpool, for example.
But this certainly doesn't apply to Europeans.
No.
Right? This is very, very clearly a description of English culture. This is not a prescription that white people have to follow, unless you're saying like the English are the model of white people and all the other Europeans are failing in their duty to be as English as possible.
By that standard of homogeneity, you could call the entirety of Latin America also European white culture, because they come from the Med.
Yeah, you made it Argentina. Exactly. But the thing is, in England, we don't think that the Spanish have to be like us. We don't think that the Italians have to be like us. We don't think the Greeks have to be like us. This is what we are like. It's not a prescription for what they must be like. They have their own culture, and they don't say, right, you need to be as lazy as a Spaniard, for example.
We wouldn't go abroad otherwise, which I suppose actually is a limiting factor on many Americans' world perspectives, because lots of them don't even own passports.
That is completely true, actually. So but everyone took great offence to this. But the thing is, I didn't find this particularly offensive, because it's just a description of the WASP culture of the United States and the values of it. And it's like, okay, that's true. And if you look at the values, I mean, as an Englishman, I'm looking at these values and going, well, there's nothing wrong with these. You know, take responsibility for yourself.
Yeah.
Be on time. Care about justice. Protect property. You know, English common law. I mean, all of this seems like common sense to me, because there's nothing wrong with it. But everyone took it to be unique to, rather than characteristic of. Right, and so that's why people are saying, well, you're saying that black people can't work hard. Are you saying that Italians can't work hard? And maybe in the latter case, I am saying that, but just teasing, furious. But that's the point. No one's saying, and this isn't saying that black people can't work hard. What it's saying is this is just characteristic of the WASP population of the United States, and this is what the European immigrants to the United States integrated into. Because, I mean, in the 18th and 19th centuries, there was a real concern about the Germanization of America, because they took lots of continental Europeans and they were essentially forced to anglicize and become English-speaking and adopt English values. I mean, look at Scalia, you know, Judge Scalia. Is it Scalia?
Justice Scalia.
Scalia, yeah. However it's pronounced. Like, he's obviously an Italian, but he went to England and was like, oh, I feel like I'm home. So exactly, you feel like you're in a place that you recognise, even though you're an Italian. You know.
So Andrew Clavin said very much a similar thing, of where he liked the parochialities of England, but he adapted very well over there because they shared lots in common with America.
Exactly right. And so that's the concept of whiteness explained for us, and it's Englishness, really, the English character of America, because of course it was founded on a bunch of English colonies. So what's blackness? Now, this is something that appears to be weird and indefinable. It's this just haze that's in the discourse, but nobody can actually define it. And the thing is, if you start trying to define it, you run into a problem that is actually not very complimentary, because of course the polarization of America is between black and white, as in the white settlers and the black slaves, or ex-slaves, of course. And the concept of black and blackness has been used as, and they talk about this, as a kind of form of resistance to the white population. It's okay, well, I can understand why they would want to, right? We have been mistreated by you. Even after we were freed, you still had Jim Crow laws. You definitely had views on racial superiority, and the black population was generally stigmatized. And so come World War II, when blacks came over to Britain, we didn't have that, and the Americans, as Callum loved pointing out, would put out propaganda saying, look, they'll allow black into the home, lads. You know, this is unusual.
Strange country.
Yeah, this is normal over there. They just treat them the same as the whites. And it's like, yeah, because we didn't have that cultural history. Now, I'm not like trying to get at Americans, and I'm not trying to make excuses or anything like that. I'm just saying that's what has happened. And so we get I just looked through a bunch of papers, basically, with people talking about blackness, and no one seems to be able to properly define it. But it's not, like I said, it's not very complimentary. And I'm not saying that this is something that is intrinsic to black people either, because we have lots of black people who are examples of the opposite of this. But of course, those black people are stigmatized as being white.
Yeah, you have internal community policing. I wonder if, I don't want to preempt the conclusion of the segment, but is it basically that it's the academic instantiation of the soft bigotry of low expectations?
That's a very kind way of phrasing, I think.
Right.
I think it's actually imposing the abolition of standards on the black community.
That makes sense, considering Lyndon B. Johnson is probably the main case you could make for existing systemic racism, because he literally debilitated intergenerational wealth in black communities by targeting women to become single mothers to say, we'll get N-words voting Democrat for the next couple hundred years.
Yes. And so anyway, in this, the main issue that I drew out of this was, blackness is still the main criterion of a lower racial origin. The ancient environmental meaning of black skin being caused by sunlight is diffused together with the meaning of black as negation, death, bad nature, and even illness. And of course, he's talking historically. How has black been considered as a black-hearted villain?
It's the Othello conception.
Yes,
Yeah.
and this in combination with the sort of biblical curse of Ham.
Yeah.
So you've got this general view, and it's like, okay, that's fine. And so we go to the next one, which is just an article, a think piece, just the elusive concept of blackness. This is an artist called Hank Willis Thomas, who's a black artist, and he looks into this in 2007. This is an old article, but it's one of the few things I can find, because there's actually very little out there that actually tries to explain what blackness is. And that first one is the sort of historical sort of way that the concept of black is used in the English-speaking world. But of course, he's going through ancient history, basically. And so this is long before European contact with Africa that these people are writing. And so it doesn't really make sense in a modern context.
Anachronistic, yeah.
Yeah. And so Willis Thomas is a photographer. And they say, at 31, Thomas had his work published in numerous books and featured in exhibitions across the country. He has received prestigious fellowships and awards, including a New York Foundation for the Arts and Fellowship in Photography. His work largely deals with some aspect of blackness in this new age. And so he's done a project called Branded, a series that uses popular advertising images to highlight the myriad ways that blackness has been commodified. In a piece called Branded Head, the ubiquitous Nike swoosh is emblazoned onto the side of a young black male's bald head. In the image, Jordan and Johnny Walker in Timberland, circa 1923, the Timberland logo has been altered to show the lynching of a black man whose body takes the shape of the classic Air Jordan stance. Right? And this is very interesting because he says, stripped of their logos, the images appear like caricatures of corporate notions of blackness and are blunt in their use of stereotypes about blacks. For example, drawing upon stereotypical depictions that infantilize blacks in the media images.
This is what Kanye West did with his song New Chains. He literally said that we're trading out the subservience to a slave master, to subservience to a materialistic culture, which is like a bastardization of the American dream, where now we obsess over a new jacket, a new pair of shoes, a new Jesus piece, without creating intergenerational wealth and opportunities. That's why he's abandoned that and he started building schools.
And I think the phrase infantilize is actually really interesting and important because that is the perspective of a child.
Yeah.
What gift am I going to get this Christmas? Not what am I going to build for next year?
Yeah, and that's a position of you are being handed something rather than you building something.
You are a dependent.
Yes,
is what that means, right? And you and I've long noticed this. In fact, if you go to the next one, you see there's just a list of like black rappers who just have the name Baby in some way.
Yeah, you're right.
And it's really
or
weird.
Little, like Little Nas X.
Exactly. It's these childlike sort of appellations and epithets that they have for themselves.
Yeah.
As if they're perennial like adolescents. And it's who's encouraged that? Who's like I would, for example, this. Do you remember DaBaby's controversy where Dave Chappelle was like, "I've come to negotiate the
don't abort DaBaby."
Yeah, I've come to negotiate the release of DaBaby. It's like, why the hell would an adult man call himself DaBaby? If you can go to the next one, you see this guy, right? If scroll down a bit, just so you can see the guy's picture, right? There's nothing childlike about this man.
He looks like 50 Cent in the Indie Club.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's not saying black people look alike. It's saying that he's tattooed and shredded.
Yeah, exactly. This guy looks like a statue.
Yeah. He's in solid. Yeah, this is getting a little homoerotic, but yeah, he's in solid shape.
He looks like a Greek statue. You know what I mean? Like this guy spends all his time at the gym, and he calls himself DaBaby.
Well, he was also. It's funny linking to your point. The reason for his cancellation was because, in a crude and crass manner, was imposing.
We'll get to it.
Okay, all right. There you go.
I've got the exact quote because that's exactly what I'm driving at. Right. This bizarre infantilization thing is, he's obviously someone who holds some sort of standards.
Yeah.
And a standard means that you are creating a space in which some things are appropriate because they improve you and they make things better, and other things are inappropriate because they reduce you and make things worse. He said this, and this is very crude and crass, and I wouldn't frame this. If you didn't show up today with HIV, AIDS, or any of them deadly sexual transmitted diseases that'll make you die in 2 or 3 weeks, put your cell phone lighter up. Ladies, if you're hygienic, I'm going to frame it as, put your cell phone lighter up. Fellas, if you're not engaging in gay acts in the parking lots, put your lighter up. Now, he's appealing to standards of purity and cleanliness.
Low bar, admittedly.
Sure, but that's people taking responsibility for their actions.
Yeah,
right?
not many cell phone lights on in the Labour Party.
Exactly. And so the culture, he got in immense amounts of trouble for this.
Yep.
And so the culture viewed blackness, I think, in general, that surrounds him, as a thing that generally adheres to low standards. And so when someone called the baby is like, hey guys, it's good to have some standards, he has to apologize. And the way that this is approached is if cleanliness, chastity, and not being infected with an STD are all things that gays and blacks can't achieve or shouldn't be expected to not achieve.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's disgraceful.
Yeah.
That's a horrible, horrible way to approach any community. Because none of these things are good. Like, you don't... no one wants these things.
They're only good if you have the Margaret Sanger position of accelerating the demise of said community as fast as possible.
Absolutely. And so I found this other article, which is a lady called Sarah Abel, who was... she went to Brazil, I think it was, or somewhere else. And she was investigating with like French and American scholars through this period. And she says, I frequently encountered antagonisms manifested by each side towards the other's conception of blackness. For instance, African-American academics who spoke knowingly of black French scholars being brainwashed by their national ideology of colorblindness, and French scholars who complained that black American scholars' compulsion to racialize everyone. The United States, where the logic of the one-drop rule has been successfully recuperated by African Americans to ensure continuing salience of blackness as resistance identity, as in, I'm not white, I'm black, and therefore I'm the opposite of what you declare whiteness to be.
The Sean King position.
And as we saw from the Smithsonian,
Yeah.
English culture is about the adherence and promotion of standards. This is what makes England a good country, as in we do not tolerate things that fall out, or we used to not tolerate things that fell outside of these standards. And so this is based both on biological ancestry and a transmitted cultural heritage, a definition that is rarely questioned in the US context. She says, thus, when Henry Louis Gates Jr. was attributed 50% European genomic ancestry in the first series of African American lives, he was able to joke, 50% European. I never expected that. I mean, do I still qualify for affirmative action? Can I get a reparations check? Half a reparations check. I had the blues. Can I still have the blues? It's like, right. That's very interesting, isn't it? His first... I mean, don't get me wrong, he's joking, right?
Yeah,
So that's
but he's phrasing it as like a colour swatch chart for cultural participation.
many a truth told in jest.
Yes.
Right? And so it's like, can I still get reparations? Can I still get affirmative action?
Yeah.
It's like, right. Because what you're saying is reparations and affirmative action are an abandonment of standards. Europeans don't give affirmative action for other Europeans. You know, they don't give reparations. So you don't get any money for free, or you shouldn't anyway, for being European.
If you're a young man.
Exactly. If you're a young man, anyway. And so, I mean, if you're 50% European, well, shouldn't you be thinking 50% standards maybe? I don't know. But the point is, like, what responsibility is being being talked about in that joke, right? And again, it's just a joke. But I think there is something that underlies it. It's about taking responsibility. It's about growing up. It's about being an adult. And I think that the culture of blackness that the left promotes in the United States is specifically designed to try and make black people not take responsibility, to keep them in a position of perpetual infantilization. Right? I know I'm going on, but I think this is important.
No,
right?
please.
So Cardi B is interesting, right? Because she's quite light-skinned, but she claims to be black. Right? And very interesting position.
Calvin Robinson's had the same conversation with me and also people who tried to put him in the black conservative box. He said, well, I'm half white, so I don't not only adopt your prescriptions due to my skin colour, but I'm just going to call myself mixed race because I'm split down the middle. I don't identify more to you just because you conscript me as a visual marker into your cause.
And he's very obviously an Englishman.
Yeah,
well.
absolutely.
So Cardi B has had to more than once explain her ethnicity because she's quite light-skinned. And so Americans are like, you're a Mexican. She's like, I'm not Mexican at all. I'm West Indian and I'm Dominican. I speak Spanish because I'm Dominican. And it's like, so what's the difference between Dominican and Mexican? And it's like everything, because of course, they're different countries, different peoples, different histories.
American geography.
Exactly. People don't be understanding S, she says. It's like, Cardi's Latin, she's not black. And it's like, bro, my features don't come from white people, as in Northwestern Europeans. They always want to race bait when it comes to me. I have Afro features, but your parents are light-skinned. And she says, all right, but my grandparents aren't. It's like, yeah, because, I mean, it's just one of those things about genetics. But the point is, so she's claiming, look, ancestrally, these are the things. But then there was a lot of outrage when she said that she doesn't let her children listen to WAP. And I was like, well, she shouldn't.
No, shouldn't have made it in the first place. But
There is that, right? But I love the way that vulture.com framed this, right? There's only one whore in Cardi B's house, and she plans on holding on to that title. Thank you very much.
so
That's a
sorry,
standard, isn't it?
But
or is that the abandonment of standards?
but also, why would a child qualify as being a whore vulture
yeah,
when her 2-year-old,
yeah. Entered the room.
someone's hard drive needs checking?
Yeah, well, they're leftists. But the point is, I think Zoe Haylock here, who wrote this, doesn't really understand what she's saying there, right? To say that Cardi B's a whore is to say that she has no distinctions between the men that she'll sleep with. Again, the lowest possible standard. It's disgusting. But Cardi B actually does uphold some standard and says on Twitter, I don't make music for kids, I make music for adults. Parents are responsible on what their children listen to or see. I'm a very sexual person, just not around my child like every other parent should be. Well, I agree with that statement.
That was impressively articulate.
And impressively adult.
Yeah.
In one way, I think racial activists would say that was a very white statement.
Yeah.
That
Unfortunately
was
so.
a statement of standards and exclusion, a statement of taking responsibility.
It was normative.
And this is why someone like Larry Elder becomes the black face of white supremacy. And this is literally what they called him.
Well, Larry Elder was actually one of my catalysts in my political journey. It was his interview with Dave Rubin that set me about questioning narrative. So I very much like the gentleman.
Yeah, I think he's great because all he's preaching is personal responsibility
Yeah.
and essentially growing up. So he's rejecting the concept of blackness, which is not taking any responsibility, not having any standards. And he's saying, no, I'm going to, and this is good for us, right? He ran for governor of California. Didn't win, obviously, but he's not gone away, and I think next time, maybe. They say this.
He has said he may run in 2024.
Well, I'm hoping he will, because I think he's right.
Perfect VP for Orange Man.
That would be fantastic.
That'd be amazing.
And then DeSantis afterwards. Make it happen, guys. But anyway, right. So, but this is the way the Los Angeles Times frames this, and I love this so much, right? It's that perhaps out of spite, or perhaps out of an insatiable need for attention, Elder opposes every single public policy idea that's supported by black people to help black people. How has any of this helped black people? How has the position of the black community improved in the last 30 years?
It was demonstrably designed to debilitate black people's entrepreneurial independence.
Exactly.
So Larry Elder is helping black people with some bitter medicine.
Exactly. You can't just give people prosperity. You have to make them earn it for themselves. That's what Larry Elder is saying. And so they hate it. And they're like, well, there are some black people who agree with him. We're not a monolith. It's like, okay, well then you can't just say blackness is, right? Then this abolition of standards that apparently blackness has become, it's not really a thing. In the same way that we, the Europeans and Englishmen, are like, no, your whiteness, that's not whiteness. That's Englishness. Right? It's not. This isn't just what Europeans think. Right? It's all different, right? And so this is exactly why Xi Jinping is actually not a champion of whiteness.
What?
Yeah, exactly. Let's go to the next one. Not even joking, right? Literally. And
I'm quite speechless.
Yeah, you'll love this. If whiteness is power, Xi Jinping is its champion.
Right. So you can see where the seeds germinate for the idea of blackness being a revolutionary consciousness, can't you? And
Well, I
it's
guess
an assumed
so.
identity, because even if the current form of blackness were to overthrow whiteness, there would be a dynamic where there are some people that are more black than the other black people, and they
Yes.
would become the new oppressed class.
Because, of course, what comes from standards is excellence.
Yes.
And from excellence comes power. And
Yeah.
since they're only concerned about power, then that's what they see. And so Xi Jinping is actually now the leader of the KKK. Because
Grand Wizard Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, exactly. Because he's interested in increasing China's excellence.
I will just make a demarcation as well for anyone who's going to hound us even after the last 30 minutes of us delineating race from standards. We believe that Englishness is excellence, not whiteness, as we've already
Yeah.
said, because the French, the Spaniards, etc. have an inferior culture and work ethic, we believe.
Yes, which is why we had the biggest empire and they didn't.
Yes.
This is just not a racial question. It's a question of culture and values. And that's why Clarence Thomas is always in the crosshairs, because Clarence Thomas is like...
King.
Yeah, exactly. Absolute king, right? All these black conservative managers, they get it.
Did you
right?
see the Supreme Court justices' listings of the amount of words used? all of the female
Yeah.
Supreme Court justices had words in the
Waffle,
1,000,
waffle.
and he had 12 words per ruling. Refuses to elaborate, leaves.
Yeah. but then it's the Einsteinian dictum, isn't it? If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it properly.
Exactly.
And if he obviously can. So they're concerned about this because one of Thomas's concerns for the black community is white paternalism, as in Democrat paternalism. Again, if you're going to be a parent, you need a child.
Yeah.
And so it's not that he disagrees that English standards are baked into the American Republic, what they call white standards. They are, of course, because it's an English-speaking country, obviously. He is concerned, and he says this, right? Well, they say this about Clarence Thomas. He thinks that they perpetuate conditions of black weakness and black victimization by making black people dependent. Thomas doesn't object to dependence as such. He thinks that depending on white people means depending on a force that is arbitrary and is whimsical as the weather and very dangerous and ends up weakening black people and destroying the kinds of habits, skills, and virtues that black people depend upon and have depended upon over the centuries of subjugation and oppression. Yeah.
Yep.
That's exactly right. Why would you want to be dependent on the Democrat Party?
That's
is
Eric.
What he's saying.
That's Eric July's brand of libertarianism. He says, "I'm not going to wait for a handout from white folks. I'm just going to build my own business. It's not just exclusively for black people. But if people want to be racist to me, then okay, I'll exist separately to them and be excellent in their absence."
Yeah, and they say one thing to understand about Thomas's conservatism is that there's a strong belief in patriarchy. He has said quite plainly that the salvation of the black race depends upon black men. This is one area where his conservatism and black nationalism converge. Yeah, and it's about black men taking responsibility.
Yeah.
About not calling yourself the baby and actually taking some responsibility and then just not saying sorry. And we can see this this white paternalism of black people in America in the way, like I forgot to add this for you, John, but you've seen the number of there are loads of Twitter threads where a black kid will kill a white kid and the parents will come out and say, well, I forgive him, it's not his fault, he couldn't have done any better. So that's what I say about a child.
Yeah.
A child who breaks something in my house or something, right? It's disgusting.
It's not a vase, it's a life.
It's not exactly. And what you're saying is those people are not my moral equals. They do not exercise the same moral agency as me. And therefore, I'm going to treat them as if they were moral inferiors. And I mean, if you're going to treat them as moral equals, you demand they be hanged. They've murdered your child.
Agreed. Yeah. It's an grievance against the moral community, not the white community, when these people go unpunished.
Yeah. But it's terrible for everyone. And so anyway, you end up, and this is the article that stemmed this entire inquiry into this whole thing. If we get rid of white people, then what happens? Say, is this sorry, you can go to the next one. Yeah, New York Times, right? The complaint here. I have a theory about the future of America that I don't want to come true. It is a theory that worries me and I have written about, that the browning of America, white supremacy, could simply be replaced by or be buffeted by a form of light supremacy in which fairer-skinned people perpetuate a modified anti-blackness and eliminating it. Why? Well, there are non-white people who care about standards, who want things to improve. Because one Latino Democrat made racist comments about people who behave in bad ways, basically. And so the literally says, right, instead of allying herself with other disadvantaged groups, the Latino community diminishes them. Their discussion was anti-black, anti-indigenous, anti-Jewish. They were doing the work of white supremacy. So, you don't understand, like, all of these people are just saying they will take responsibility for their actions. They want to improve things. They have standards. And so this, I think, is the most revealing part. The fallacy is to believe that every person in the community that has been oppressed by white supremacy will reject it. So what they're saying is we are being oppressed by standards, by self-control, by taking responsibility. And in a way, I see what you're saying, right? It's tough. It is difficult to take responsibility for yourself and for other people. This is difficult. You could characterize it as a form of oppression, but what you get from that is, of course, self-improvement from the self-imposition of these standards. You become a better person for it. You do not simply become the lowest common denominator, as worse and as bad as it can be, which is how the Democrats would have it, so you keep voting Democrat for the next 200 years. That's what I think blackness is.
Thanks for watching this segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters. If you enjoyed that, you can subscribe to our website and become a premium member and access more of our content, including this recent compilation that Callum has mocked up of the Labour Party conference. This is multi-part because there is a lot to go over there. If you'd like to find more on Callum, you can find him on Getter at Callum. Thank you and goodbye.